Richard Rorty's Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, first published in 1979, is a significant work in the realm of contemporary philosophy. It presents a radical critique of traditional philosophical ideas about knowledge, truth, and representation. Rorty challenges the foundational assumptions of analytic philosophy, which has its roots in the works of philosophers like Descartes and Kant, and advocates for a new understanding of philosophy that is more aligned with pragmatism. In this book, Rorty argues that philosophy should abandon its preoccupation with discovering objective truths about the world, proposing instead that it focus on resolving practical human problems. The Mirror of Nature. One of Rorty's central arguments in Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature is that Western philosophy, from Descartes onward, has been dominated by the metaphor of the mind as a mirror that reflects external reality. This metaphor implies that the mind's main role is to provide an accurate representation of the world, much like a mirror shows an image. According to Rorty, this approach has led to a problematic epistemology that treats knowledge as the accurate reflection of an independent, objective reality. He suggests that philosophers have traditionally viewed their task as uncovering the criteria for distinguishing between accurate and inaccurate representations. Rorty rejects this metaphor, claiming that the notion of knowledge as a mirror of nature is misguided. He argues that there is no fixed, independent reality that the mind passively reflects. Instead, knowledge should be understood as a product of social practices, linguistic conventions, and historical contexts. By rejecting the idea of the mind as a mirror, Rorty challenges the long-standing goal of philosophy to provide a foundation for science and other forms of knowledge. The critique of epistemology. Rorty's critique of epistemology is another key aspect of philosophy and the mirror of nature. He argues that epistemology, which seeks to explain how knowledge is possible and to establish a foundation for knowledge, has failed in its task. According to Rorty, traditional epistemology is based on the assumption that there are intrinsic criteria for distinguishing between true and false beliefs. Philosophers like Descartes, Locke, and Kant believed that by analyzing the structure of the mind or the nature of experience, they could uncover these criteria and provide a secure foundation for knowledge. However, Rorty claims that this project is doomed to fail. He argues that there are no objective, universal criteria for determining the truth or falsity of beliefs. Instead, our beliefs are shaped by the contingent historical and social contexts in which we live. For Rorty, knowledge is not about discovering an objective reality but about achieving consensus within a community of language users. He suggests that philosophy should abandon the search for foundational knowledge and instead focus on understanding how different forms of life and discourse function. Pragmatism and philosophy. Rorty's rejection of traditional epistemology is closely tied to his commitment to pragmatism, a philosophical tradition associated with thinkers like Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, and John Dewey. Pragmatism rejects the idea that there are fixed, immutable truths about the world, emphasizing instead the importance of practical consequences and human purposes in shaping our beliefs. Rorty argues that philosophy should follow the lead of pragmatism by abandoning the search for objective truth and instead focusing on solving practical problems. In Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, Rorty suggests that philosophy's role should be more modest than traditionally conceived. Instead of acting as a foundation for all other forms of knowledge, philosophy should be seen as a kind of cultural conversation, one that does not aim to provide definitive answers but rather to facilitate dialogue and reflection. Rorty advocates for a post-philosophical culture in which philosophy no longer seeks to provide a privileged perspective on reality but is instead just one voice among many in a pluralistic society. The role of language. A key element of Rorty's critique of traditional philosophy is his emphasis on the role of language. He argues that much of the confusion in philosophy arises from the mistaken assumption that language is a transparent medium through which we access the world. According to Rorty, language does not simply mirror reality, instead, it plays an active role in shaping our understanding of the world. In Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, Rorty draws on the work of thinkers like Ludwig Wittgenstein, Martin Heidegger, and Wilfrid Sellars to argue that our concepts and categories are not fixed reflections of reality but are contingent and historically situated. He suggests that the meanings of words and the criteria for their use are not determined by an underlying reality but by the way they function within particular linguistic communities. This view leads Rorty to reject the idea that there is a single, correct way to describe the world, emphasizing instead the plurality of discourses and perspectives. The end of metaphysics. Rorty's critique of the traditional philosophical project leads him to call for the end of metaphysics. For Rorty, metaphysics is the attempt to discover the fundamental structure of reality, to uncover the essential nature of things. This project, according to Rorty, is based on the mistaken assumption that there is a deep, underlying reality that philosophy can access through rational reflection. Instead, Rorty argues that philosophy should recognize the contingency of all its concepts and theories. He proposes that we abandon the search for metaphysical foundations and instead focus on how our beliefs and practices help us achieve our goals in the world. This does not mean that Rorty is advocating for a form of relativism where all beliefs are equally valid. Rather, he suggests that we should evaluate beliefs based on their usefulness and their ability to foster communication and cooperation within a community. Philosophy as conversation. One of the central themes of philosophy and the mirror of nature is Rorty's vision of philosophy as conversation. He argues that philosophy should no longer aim to discover objective truths or provide a foundation for other disciplines. Instead, it should be seen as an ongoing dialogue, a conversation between different perspectives, traditions, and ways of thinking. Rorty's vision of philosophy as conversation is influenced by his belief in the importance of pluralism. He suggests that we should embrace the diversity of human life and thought rather than seeking to reduce it to a single, unified framework. In this sense, Rorty's approach to philosophy is democratic, as it values the contributions of all individuals and communities, recognizing that no single perspective has a monopoly on truth. Legacy and criticism. Since its publication, Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature has been both highly influential and controversial. Rorty's rejection of traditional epistemology and metaphysics, along with his embrace of pragmatism and pluralism, has resonated with many philosophers, particularly those in the tradition of American pragmatism and continental philosophy. His work has been seen as a significant challenge to the dominance of analytic philosophy, opening up new avenues for philosophical inquiry. However, Rorty's ideas have also faced criticism. Some philosophers have accused him of promoting a form of relativism that undermines the possibility of objective knowledge. Others have argued that his dismissal of traditional philosophical concerns is too radical and that it risks abandoning important questions about truth, knowledge, and reality. Despite these criticisms, Rorty's work remains a key text in contemporary philosophy, offering a provocative and influential critique of the philosophical tradition. Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature represents a turning point in contemporary philosophy, challenging the traditional goals of the discipline and advocating for a new, more pragmatic approach. Rorty's rejection of the mirror metaphor, his critique of epistemology and metaphysics, and his emphasis on language and conversation have reshaped philosophical discussions in significant ways. While his ideas continue to generate debate, Rorty's work has had a lasting impact on how philosophers think about knowledge, truth, and the role of philosophy in society.